Friends, it was a rather unusual week. We started in Miami and then went to one of the most magical places on this planet, Vail, Colorado. And then we doubled back to Driftwood, Texas, which I would argue is one of the tastiest places on the planet because about 3 miles that way is, I want to say magical. I don't want to say, you know what, because of what we have here, wunderbar. The Salt Lick Barbecue. It is currently the morning. We are working on the full first drive review of this, the 2017 Porsche 718 Boxster. So why don't you and I do a tech review and then we can go to the Salt Lick. So let's start where we always start. I always have a problem with these because the engine's lost, but let's start with the engine. So a bit of a hint before we get started here. This is going to be difficult for 3 reasons. Number one, there is a lot to cover, so I feel it best that you bust out like your Etch-a-Sketch or something like that. And number two, I can't show you the engine. It's like hidden here. I'd have to remove all this stuff here. And Porsche, they're very funny about getting their cars back in one piece. And number 3, I made the very unfortunate executive decision to wear a black shirt in Texas in September in soup. But nonetheless, we are professionals, we will press on. Now we need to look at this really in 2 columns. There is this, the base 718 Boxster, and then there is the Boxster 718S. So a bit of a newsflash for those of you that have been hiding under a rock for the past year or so. Porsche has taken the executive decision to move this, now known as the 982 platform, to an all-flat 4-cylinder engine with a single turbocharger. They did this very much for the same reasons as they did in the 991.2, to game the tax schemes around the world while simultaneously increasing horsepower and torque. Now we covered that in the 991.2 episodes back in April, so we should use that as a reference, but really let's put a pin in that because some of that text is going to show up here in just a bit. So what are the horsepower and torque numbers? Well, this is the 2-liter flat 4 single turbocharger, and this is 300 horsepower. But more interestingly, have you ever driven like a Subaru or like an old 911? Flat engines, they inherently, their torque comes in very high in the torque curve. You really got to just stick your foot into these things to get power out of them. Well, here, the Porsche engineers, they basically have fiddled with things, and now it comes in here at 1950 RPM, 280 pound-feet of torque, 1950 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,500 RPM. Now let's put this one aside, the Boxster S. Now what they did is they have a bigger block there, and they accomplished that mainly through an increased bore, and that's 2.5 liters in displacement, but what they got there is 350 horsepower and 309 pound-feet of torque. Now that's similar to this in that the torque comes in very low, 1900, so a little bit lower, stays flat all the way up to 4500. Okay, so now that we've covered all the bullets and numbers, let's dive into some tech here. So in the 991.2, this is a huge shift to take your biggest selling or most important car and move it to an all-turbo format. So you don't just look at one car, you look at all the cars coming down the line. So you and I have covered like scalable product architecture in those Volvo episodes. That's not just for the car itself, it's also for manufacturing. Like for example, some of the engine bits here come directly from a 991.2, like the timing chain, the water pump, some of the valve train, literally pilfered from a 991.2. But then there are some other interesting bits here, like for example, the variable cam lift. What they've done here, it was on the previous car, but it was only for the intake. Now it's for the exhaust, similar to the 991.2. The previous car also had an integrated dry sump system in it, but there what they've done is it used to be like 20 parts. Here it's down to 6 parts. Now it's not just parts that are pilfered directly from the 991.2, it's also parts that share a common architecture. For example, the turbocharger. So in this one, the base car, it has the standard wastegate you would have in any turbocharged car. But then in a Boxster S, what they've done is they've added adjustable vanes in the impeller, which we've seen in some other cars, but now now it's in the Boxster S. Now there's two pieces of information I've yet to share with you, and that is the boost pressure itself from said turbos. And this is where it's kind of funny, because I got to know one of the chief powertrain engineers of this specific engine, and he was sharing some information. So it's 19 PSI from the base car, but the S is 16. So I go up to him like, hey, why less boost pressure? And he looked at me in a very engineering kind of way and said, I have a bigger block. Why do I need more boost pressure? And with that, let's look at driving dynamics. Now, if you are a Porsche fanboy, you probably have heard things like PASM or sport suspension or sport exhaust, all that kind of stuff. There are a couple of things that are changed here. So if this one is fitted with PASM, which it is, the ride height sits a bit lower, about 10 mils, about 0.8 of an inch. But then in a Boxster S, those cars fitted with PASM and a sport suspension, they sit 20 mils lower. Now let's put aside the suspension for a minute. And by the way, the wheels, this car has a lot of options, and one of them is these great like gray pewter finish wheels on the white and the red interior. Very slick. Anyway, let's go up here and talk brakes. So whether it's a Boxster or a Boxster S, it's 13-inch diameter rotors in the front, 11.8 in the rear. And the actual calipers stay the same in the rear, whether it's Boxster or Boxster S. But over in the front, when it goes to a Boxster S, it changes the front caliper. Basically, once again, they pilfer something from the 991.2, and that is the 4-piston aluminum caliper. The rest of the stuff, we kind of know what's going on here. Matter of fact, if you look at all the panels, everything except for this and the windshield is effectively a new panel. But now, let's talk about the inside. Okay, let's see if I can gracefully put my arse in here. And then while we're in here, I want to point out that there aren't many changes, which is to say a very good thing, because I'm a huge fan of this lot-o button design theme. We've discussed in many episodes, I just don't like the unified controllers. We'll have to come back to this in the coming up Panamera, because I believe there were some changes to this. Anyway, as I said before, this is just a very fancy place to be, because this one has a lot of options, like this full leather interior, stainless steel here, sports seats here, even the roll bar is color keyed to the body. Very neat touch. But there is one change here, and it now is fitted with Apple CarPlay. And we actually spent some time in a full episode just dealing with Apple CarPlay in the 991.2. Same system here. So go and check that out, because actually it actually works pretty well, believe it or not. And let's put that aside. Now, there is one option this car is not fitted with, thankfully, and that is the PDK. And that's where one of the changes are. So you remember in the 981 there was a coast mode. Well, now the coast mode has been extended to anything up to 7 kilometers an hour. So if you're going to a light, like approaching a light, the engine will switch off anywhere below 7 kilometers an hour and then switch back on if you hit the gas or the brake. Then there is another option here, this steering wheel, but the actual design theme is not optional. It's the size of the wheel, the diameter of the wheel is smaller. This is a sport diameter wheel, but that works in conjunction with the Sport Chrono package. Also optional, and this like button here that controls it. Now, this is so fancy in here, I feel bad sitting in here because I am sweating like a pig. So why don't we talk outside? So in summary, what do we got? Well, a theme we've seen with some other manufacturers, a lot of changes that you don't see in a package that looks familiar. Now, we've come to expect this from Porsche of all manufacturers, because they've had a design around since, what, 54 years? So this is not a bad thing here. So a couple of things. Number one, a programming note. We are going to do a full first drive review of this car here, but because of the scheduling of our time here, we're actually going to shoot the full first drive review in California. So there'll be a little bit more of a delay from our usual tech review to full first drive review here. But in the interim, you can go look at our Cayman full first drive review, which we did shoot in Texas. But then I want to turn this around to you guys and leave you guys with a question. So you may have already seen that Cayman episode, and I already talked 4 versus 6. Now I want to leave you with a question of, here is a base car with a lot of options, and it looks really cool and it's fun to drive. But the question is, how many of those options would you actually get? Like, would you just get the base car with the PASM and maybe the sports suspension and be done with it? Or would you do the full leather and all this kind of stuff and color keyed keys and roll bars and all that kind of stuff? And don't just tell me which ones you would choose. I want to understand why you would choose them and the car you currently drive, because I'm interested to find out who would drive this or where they came from. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes and Google Play. You can also find us on five international airlines: Emirates, Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Australia, Virgin America, and coming soon, American Airlines. And number two, I want to leave you with a fun fact. Actually, the fun fact really should be, it is ridiculously hot, and I am just sweating bullets right now. But really, the more interesting fun fact is, this morning I went for a run before shooting this thing here, and I crashed my way into it was like a relay race marathon thing. They actually tried to give me the relay because they saw me in my hook 'em horns, like burnt orange shirt, but I had to rudely say no. So if you saw me this morning and I did not take your relay thing, I apologize. And until I see you guys next time, bis später.